My name is Beverly Thompson, 32 years old, and until last Christmas, I thought family meant unconditional love and protection. That changed when my sister Julia slapped my 6-month-old daughter Lily across her chubby cheeks during our family Christmas dinner. As my baby screamed in pain and confusion, Julia just laughed and told everyone I was overreacting. The worst part was not the slap, but the deafening silence that followed from my family. If you are watching this video, where are you from? Drop a like and subscribe as I share how my husband finally ended my sister's reign of terror. I grew up in a middle-class suburban home in Maple Grove, Minnesota, with perfectly trimmed lawns and neighbors who waved from their driveways. Our house was a typical 2-story colonial, with blue shutters and a tire swing hanging from the oak tree in our front yard. It was picture-perfect from the outside, but inside, a complicated dynamic was brewing between me and my younger sister, Julia. Julia is 4 years younger than me, with naturally blonde hair that our mother spent hours styling into perfect curls for family photos. From the moment she could walk and talk, Julia developed a pattern of wanting whatever I had. If I received a new doll for my birthday, Julia would throw a tantrum until my parents bought her the same one. When I wore my favorite purple sweater to school, Julia would mysteriously pull it from the laundry and claim it as hers the following week. This wasn't normal sibling rivalry. Julia exhibited an intense, almost obsessive jealousy that went beyond typical sisterly competition. In 3rd grade, I won a spelling bee and received a small trophy. The next day, I found it shattered in the trash can. Julia claimed our dog knocked it over, but the calculating look in her 7-year-old eyes told me differently. My parents never saw through her manipulations. Julia mastered the art of playing victim from an early age. If I confronted her about taking my things, she would burst into tears, claiming I was being mean to her. My father would sigh, run his hand through his thinning hair, and tell me, "Beverly, be nice to your sister. She looks up to you." My mother would add, "Sharing is caring," while Julia smirked behind their backs. To maintain peace in our household, I learned to give in to Julia's demands. If she wanted to play with my new calculator watch, I handed it over. When she insisted on joining my sleepover with friends from the debate team, I made room for her. Each concession reinforced her behavior, teaching her that tears and tantrums would get her what she wanted. College became my escape. I moved 400 miles away to attend Northwestern University in Illinois, breathing free air for the first time. The distance from my family, especially Julia, felt like removing a heavy backpack I had been carrying for years. I could choose my own friends, keep my belongings secure, and make decisions without considering how Julia might react. It was during my sophomore year that I met Andrew in a literature class. He sat 2 rows behind me, and I noticed him because he always asked thoughtful questions that made even our jaded professor smile. One rainy afternoon, we both sought shelter in the same coffee shop near campus. He recognized me, waved me over to his table, and we talked until the baristas started stacking chairs around us. Andrew came from a completely different family background. He grew up in Seattle with parents who had been happily married for 35 years and a brother with whom he shared a genuine friendship. The first time I visited his family home during spring break, I was astonished by the easy laughter and comfortable silences. No one competed for attention or undermined each other with subtle jabs disguised as jokes. It was refreshing and a bit disorienting. With physical distance and personal growth, I hoped my relationship with Julia would improve. We were adults now, surely capable of moving beyond childhood grudges. During holiday breaks, I made efforts to connect with her, asking about her classes at the local community college, complimenting her new haircut, bringing small gifts from Chicago. Julia responded with superficial warmth, but I could still see the calculation behind her smile. When Andrew and I got serious, I introduced him to my family with trepidation. Julia turned on her charm, complimenting Andrew's intelligence and asking detailed questions about his computer science major. Later, she cornered me in the kitchen and whispered, "How did you land someone like him? He seems way out of your league." Her words were wrapped in a laugh, as if sharing a joke, but the familiar sting was there. Our wedding 3 years after graduation became another stage for Julia's behavior. As my maid of honor, she suggested a bridesmaid dress color that made everyone look sallow, conveniently forgot to confirm the flower arrangements, and gave a wedding toast that included embarrassing stories about my awkward teenage years rather than celebrating our relationship. Andrew noticed her behavior but gently encouraged me to enjoy our day despite Julia's attempts to steal attention. When I announced my pregnancy a year later, Julia's face froze in a smile that never reached her eyes. "I always thought I'd be the first to have babies," she said, though she had never mentioned wanting children before. She remained single throughout her 20s, dating sporadically but never settling into a serious relationship. With each milestone in my life, Julia's bitterness seemed to grow, though she masked it with social media posts proclaiming how proud she was of her big sister. Despite our history, I tried to include Julia in my pregnancy journey. I invited her to my baby shower, asked her opinion on nursery colors, and sent her ultrasound photos. Part of me still yearned for the sister bond I observed in other families. Julia responded with the right words but maintained an emotional distance that felt both familiar and disappointing. When Lily was born on a warm June morning, my world shifted on its axis. Looking into my daughter's deep blue eyes, I felt a fierce, protective love unlike anything I had experienced. Andrew and I spent those first weeks in a sleep-deprived haze, marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch from our perfect little girl. Julia visited the hospital the day after Lily's birth, bringing an expensive baby outfit that was far too large and would never be practical for a newborn. She insisted on holding Lily, though her body language was stiff and uncomfortable. As she cradled my daughter, she made odd comments. "Her nose is a bit large, isn't it? Hopefully she grows into it." And later, "She's so fussy. I guess some babies are just difficult." Over the following months, Julia's behavior around Lily raised red flags. She would ask to hold her, but then almost immediately want to hand her back if Lily made the slightest fuss. She would make subtle comparisons between Lily and our cousin's much more advanced baby of the same age. Once, when Lily spit up on Julia's designer blouse, I caught a flash of undisguised disgust and anger on my sister's face before she composed herself. Despite these warning signs, I still hoped for a peaceful Christmas gathering. Our family tradition involved dinner at my parents' home on Christmas Day, with extended family joining for the celebration. It would be Lily's first Christmas, and though she was too young to remember it, I wanted to establish traditions and take plenty of photos to show her someday. As the holiday approached, I felt the familiar anxiety that accompanied family gatherings, now amplified by concerns about managing a 6-month-old baby's schedule amid the chaos. Andrew assured me we could leave early if needed, but I was determined to give Lily the experience of a family Christmas, hoping against hope that the magic of the season might somehow transform our family dynamics. The snow was falling in lazy fat flakes as Andrew pulled our SUV into my parents' driveway on Christmas Day. Their suburban Minnesota home looked like something from a holiday movie, with multicolored lights outlining the roof and windows, an illuminated snowman on the front lawn, and a wreath adorned with pine cones on the front door. I checked my watch, noting we had arrived right at 2 o'clock, exactly when my mother had instructed. "Ready for this?" Andrew asked, squeezing my hand before turning off the engine. His understanding smile warmed me more than the car's heater. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, turning to look at Lily in her car seat, bundled in the red and green Christmas outfit my mother had mailed us last week. She was awake, contentedly gumming her favorite rubber giraffe. We gathered our things, the process exponentially more complicated now that we traveled with a baby. Andrew hoisted the diaper bag over one shoulder and carefully extracted Lily's car seat, while I carried the tote bag filled with wrapped presents and a homemade apple pie. My father opened the door before we could knock, his face breaking into a genuine smile as he spotted Lily. "There's my little Christmas angel," he exclaimed, ushering us into the warmth of the house. The familiar scent of roasting turkey and my mother's cinnamon apple potpourri filled the air. Inside, the living room was crowded with family. My mother's parents sat on the sofa, my grandfather already dozing despite the lively conversation around him. My father's sister, Aunt Patricia, and her husband, Uncle Roger, were mixing drinks at the small bar cart in the corner. My cousins Derek and Melissa chatted near the fireplace, While family friends, the Hendersons, occupied the love seat. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a Christmas-patterned apron, her face lighting up at the sight of her granddaughter. "Let me see that beautiful baby girl," she cooed, immediately reaching for Lily, who smiled and kicked her legs in recognition of her grandmother. I scanned the room, both relieved and anxious to see that Julia hadn't arrived yet. As if reading my thoughts, my mother said, "Julia texted that she's running a bit late. You know how she is about making an entrance." She bounced Lily gently in her arms, pointing out the Christmas tree decorations to her. We settled in, greeting everyone and accepting cups of hot cider. My parents' living room was transformed into a Christmas wonderland, with a 7-foot pine tree covered in ornaments collected over decades, stockings hung on the fireplace mantel, and festive candles on every surface. Aunt Patricia immediately launched into stories about her recent Caribbean cruise, while Uncle Roger predictably complained about the cold Minnesota winter. 45 minutes after our arrival, the front door burst open with a gust of cold air. Julia swept in, arms laden with glossy shopping bags from expensive stores. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless, and she wore a fitted red dress that probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment. "Merry Christmas, everyone," she announced, as if bestowing a gift merely with her presence. "Sorry I'm late. The roads are absolutely treacherous. Plus, I had to make an emergency stop to pick up a few more presents." My father hurried to help her with her coat, while my mother abandoned her kitchen duties to exclaim over Julia's outfit and hair. My sister accepted the attention as her due, distributing air kisses and compliments with practiced charm. "Beverly, there you are, hiding in the corner as usual," Julia said, finally acknowledging me. She gave me a quick hug, then held me at arm's length. "Still hanging on to that baby weight, I see. Don't worry, it took my coworker Stephanie almost 2 years to get her figure back." Before I could respond, she spotted Andrew. "Andrew, looking handsome as ever. That sweater brings out your eyes." Her voice dropped to a throaty pitch that made me clench my teeth. Julia's gaze finally fell on Lily, who was now being held by my cousin Melissa. "And there's the little princess," she said, her smile tight. "My Christmas gift for her is absolutely perfect. Designer baby clothes, they're just adorable." The next hour passed in relative peace, as family members caught up with one another. Lily was passed from arms to arms, becoming the center of attention with her baby babbles and gummy smiles. Everyone except Julia seemed eager to hold her. My sister always had an excuse ready. "Oh, I just applied hand lotion," or "This dress is dry clean only." When my father announced it was time to carve the turkey, we migrated to the dining room. The large oak table had been extended to its full length and covered with my mother's best tablecloth, the one reserved for special occasions. Candles flickered in silver holders, and the good china gleamed under the chandelier light. I secured Lily in her portable high chair, positioning it between my chair and Andrew's. She was still too young for solid food beyond the occasional mashed banana or rice cereal, but I wanted her to be part of the family gathering. I placed a few soft toys on her tray to keep her entertained. My father stood at the head of the table, carving knife poised above the golden brown turkey. "Before we eat, let's join hands for grace," he suggested. We linked hands around the table, and he offered a simple prayer of gratitude for food, family, and the blessing of a new generation joining our celebration. As we filled our plates with turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and my mother's famous green bean casserole, I felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps this Christmas would mark the beginning of new, positive traditions with Lily. I imagined future holidays where she would help bake cookies with her grandmother, hang ornaments with her grandfather, and maybe even develop a normal, loving relationship with her Aunt Julia. The conversation flowed around the table, touching on local news, neighbors' holiday decorations, and the perennial debate about whether the Vikings might make it to the playoffs. Julia dominated much of the discussion, regaling everyone with tales of her success in pharmaceutical sales. "I closed the Anderson account last week," she announced. "Biggest commission check of the quarter. My regional manager says I'm on track for the company retreat in Bali." I noticed Julia refilling her wine glass frequently. her voice growing louder, her gestures more expansive. By the time the meal was half over, she had consumed nearly an entire bottle of Cabernet by herself. Her cheeks were flushed, and her laughter had taken on a sharp edge. As dessert approached, I observed Julia directing increasingly obvious attention toward Andrew. She touched his arm when making a point, asked his opinion specifically on topics, and positioned her body to give him the best view of her low-cut dress. Andrew responded with polite but minimal engagement, occasionally catching my eye with a subtle eye roll that only I would notice. Meanwhile, Lily had been remarkably patient throughout the long meal, but was beginning to show signs of restlessness. She dropped her teething ring repeatedly, kicked her little legs in frustration, and made the grunting sounds that usually preceded fussiness. I alternated between eating my dinner and providing her with different toys to maintain her interest in staying seated. "Your baby hasn't learned to sit still yet?" Julia commented after Lily let out a particularly loud squeal. "My friend Tiffany's daughter was perfectly behaved at restaurants by this age. She's doing great for a 6-month-old, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Babies this age aren't meant to sit still for hours. She's actually been exceptionally patient." "If you say so," Julia smirked, taking another large sip of wine. "I just think proper discipline starts early." I bit back a retort, focusing instead on wiping Lily's drool with a soft cloth. As the meal progressed toward dessert, I could feel the familiar tension building, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. My mother began clearing dinner plates, waving away offers of help as she always did. No, you all relax. Beverly, maybe you should take the baby to the living room if she's getting fussy." "She's fine, Mom," I said, not wanting to be excluded from the family conversation. "She just needs a little entertainment." I handed Lily a colorful plastic set of keys, which she immediately began to shake, delighted by the rattling sound. "God, that's annoying," Julia muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was now starting on her 4th glass of wine, her words taking on a slight slur. "Some of us are trying to have adult conversations." My father attempted to diffuse the situation. "Who's ready for pie?" Mary made both pumpkin and apple this year. As my mother brought out the pies and began serving slices, Lily became more vocal, alternating between happy babbles and frustrated whines. I offered her pacifier, which she accepted momentarily before spitting it out. I knew she wasn't hungry, having nursed just before we sat down for dinner, but the excitement and overstimulation of the day were catching up to her. "Control that baby, would you?" Julia said, no longer bothering to hide her irritation. Her voice cut through the general conversation, creating an uncomfortable pause. "She's just being a baby, Julia," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "This is a lot of stimulation for someone her age. Maybe you should take her to another room," my mother suggested again, her eyes darting nervously between her daughters. "You could use my bedroom to settle her down." "I don't want to miss out on family time," I explained, bouncing Lily gently on my lap. "She'll calm down in a minute. This is her first Christmas, and I want her to be part of it, even if she won't remember it." Julia rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's not like she knows it's Christmas. She's a baby. She doesn't understand anything yet." Andrew placed his hand on my knee under the table, a silent show of support that gave me strength. "Actually, babies are much more perceptive than people realize," he said calmly. "They pick up on atmospheres and emotions from a very young age." Julia shot him a look of annoyance before returning her glare to Lily, who was now reaching for everything within her grasp. I had placed her back in the high chair so I could eat my pie, and she was exploring her surroundings with typical baby curiosity. What happened next occurred so quickly that at first I wasn't sure I had seen it correctly. Lily's little arms swung out, her coordination still developing, and her hand knocked into Julia's wine glass. The glass tipped over, sending a wave of deep red Cabernet across the white tablecloth and splashing onto Julia's expensive red dress. "My dress!" Julia shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "This is a $400 Valentino. Look what your brat did." Before I could even reach for a napkin or apologize, Julia did the unthinkable. She leaned over, her face contorted with rage, and slapped Lily across her chubby cheek with an open palm. The sound of the slap seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. For a split second, Lily's face registered pure shock, her blue eyes widening in confusion and betrayal. Then her face crumpled, and she let out a piercing scream of pain and fear that cut through me like a physical blow. I sat frozen, my brain unable to process what had just happened. Had my sister, my own flesh and blood, actually struck my baby daughter? The room seemed to tilt around me, sounds becoming muffled as if I were underwater. Across the table, I heard the distinct clatter of Andrew's fork hitting his plate. From my peripheral vision, I saw his face transform from disbelief to a cold, controlled fury I had never witnessed before. Julia broke the stunned silence with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, stop overreacting. She needed to learn about consequences. You can't let kids destroy things without discipline." That laugh, that casual dismissal of violence against my child, snapped me back to reality. I lunged forward, snatching Lily from her high chair and cradling her against my chest. Her screams had intensified, her little body rigid with distress, her cheek bearing a distinct red handprint. "Did you just slap my baby?" My voice came out as a trembling whisper, shock still muffling my reaction. "Did you just hit my 6-month-old daughter?" Julia rolled her eyes, dabbing at her dress with a napkin. "You are being so dramatic right now." "It was just a little tap to teach her a lesson. This is exactly why your kid is going to be a spoiled brat, because you overreact to everything." I looked around the table, desperately seeking allies, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge the horror of what had just occurred. My father cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses nervously. My mother twisted her napkin in her hands. Aunt Patricia suddenly became very interested in rearranging her silverware. Uncle Roger stared intently at his pie, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Not a single person spoke up. Not one family member condemned the fact that a grown woman had just physically assaulted a defenseless infant. The silence was deafening, crushing, more painful even than Julia's action. In that moment, I realized a terrible truth. My family would sacrifice my daughter's safety and well-being on the altar of false harmony. They would ignore abuse rather than confront Julia's behavior. The people who should have been Lily's strongest protectors were complicit in their silence. Lily continued to cry, her little hand reaching up to touch her injured cheek, her eyes full of confusion and hurt. I felt tears welling in my own eyes, a mixture of rage, betrayal, and maternal pain. I looked to Andrew, finding his gaze already fixed on me, a silent communication passing between us. Whatever happened next, I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. And the holiday warmth had been replaced by a cold, harsh reality about my family that I could no longer ignore. My father was the first to break the terrible silence. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as he always did when uncomfortable. Now, let's all calm down. It's Christmas. For goodness sake." "I'm sure Julia didn't mean it quite like that," my mother added, her voice high and strained. She reached for the serving spoon, as if dessert could somehow erase what had just happened. "Anyone want whipped cream on their pie?" I stared at them in disbelief, Lily still sobbing against my shoulder. "Are you serious right now? Julia just slapped your granddaughter across the face. And you're offering whipped cream?" Aunt Patricia studied her manicure intently. Uncle Roger suddenly became fascinated with a loose thread on his sweater sleeve. My cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances but remained silent. No one would meet my eyes. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," Julia said, still focused on blotting the wine stain on her dress. "It's not like I punched her or something. It was just a little discipline. Kids need boundaries." "She's 6 months old," I shot back, my voice rising. "She's a baby who doesn't even understand what she did. You don't discipline infants with physical violence." Julia's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Well, someone needs to teach her, since you obviously aren't. That dress cost more than your entire Target wardrobe. But of course, now everyone's going to take precious Beverly's side again." My grandmother, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold, suddenly spoke up. "In my day, Children knew how to behave at the dinner table. A little discipline never hurt anyone. We didn't coddle babies the way you young mothers do now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own grandmother defending someone who had struck her great-granddaughter? I looked down at Lily, who had subsided into hiccuping sobs, her cheek still bearing the red imprint of Julia's hand. My cousin Derek cleared his throat. Maybe you are being a bit overprotective, Bev. First-time mom and all that. It's natural, but babies are tougher than they look. Overprotective? I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. Is it overprotective to not want my baby to be slapped? Let's change the subject, my aunt suggested brightly. This pie is delicious, Mary. Did you use a new recipe this year? I looked around at the family members attempting to continue eating dessert as if nothing had happened. The surreal normalcy they were trying to enforce made me feel like I was losing my mind. Was I the only one who recognized how wrong this was? I don't understand how all of you can just sit there, I said, my voice rising with emotion. If someone slapped one of your children, would you just keep eating pie? Now, Beverly, my father said in his authoritative voice, the one he used when he thought I was being unreasonable, let's not ruin Christmas with dramatics. Julia's had a few glasses of wine. The baby surprised her. Accidents happen. This wasn't an accident, I exclaimed. She deliberately hit my child. How is that an accident? Julia set down her wineglass with exaggerated care. Here we go again. Beverly needs to be the center of attention, as usual. Even on Christmas, you have to make everything about you. This isn't about me, I retorted. It's about the fact that you assaulted my daughter and nobody in this family seems to care. Assault? Julia laughed scornfully. God, you are such a drama queen. It was a tap, barely even that. Your precious princess won't even remember it tomorrow. That's not the point. I was fully crying now, tears of frustration and betrayal streaming down my face. The point is that you thought it was acceptable to hit a baby, and everyone at this table is enabling you by pretending it's normal. You've always been jealous of me, Julia continued, as if I hadn't spoken. You can't stand that I'm successful while you're stuck changing diapers all day. You've always resented me. My mother stood up, wringing her hands. Girls, please. It's Christmas. Can we please just enjoy our family time? Beverly, you're getting yourself all worked up over nothing. Nothing? I looked at my mother in shock. You think hitting a baby is nothing? No one's saying that, my father interjected. But you know how Julia gets when she's had a few drinks. She didn't mean any harm. Intention doesn't matter, I said, my voice breaking. Impact matters. And the impact is that my daughter was hurt by someone who should love and protect her. Julia's face twisted into a smirk. Oh, save the therapy, speak for your mommy group. You always were oversensitive. Remember when you cried for 3 days because I borrowed your prom dress? You didn't borrow it, you ruined it deliberately. I shot back, old wounds reopening, just like you're trying to ruin this day. See? Julia appealed to the table at large. Everything's always my fault. St. Beverly can do no wrong. She's always been Mom and Dad's favorite. I couldn't believe Julia was trying to make herself the victim in this situation. Even more shocking was how the family seemed to be buying into it, with sympathetic glances thrown her way. I think we all need to take a breath, my mother suggested. These things happen in families. By tomorrow, we'll all have a good laugh about this. A good laugh? I repeated incredulously. You think child abuse is funny? Now, you're just being ridiculous, my uncle said, speaking up for the first time. No one abused anyone. Let's not throw around words like that. Next you'll be calling the police. Maybe I should, I said, the thought occurring to me for the first time. Maybe that's what it would take for all of you to take this seriously. You would call the police on your own sister on Christmas? My mother looked horrified. Beverly, think about what you're saying. I am thinking, I replied, holding Lily closer. I'm thinking that not one person at this table is standing up for an innocent baby who was hurt. I'm thinking that you're all more concerned with keeping the peace than doing what's right. You always have to make everything so difficult, Julia said with a dramatic sigh. This is why people find you exhausting. That comment, so casually cruel, landed like a physical blow. Was this how my family truly saw me? As difficult and exhausting for expecting basic respect and safety for my child? I stood up, still clutching Lily to my chest. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, but my resolve was solidifying with each passing second. "I think we need to leave," I announced, looking at Andrew. "Don't be silly," my mother protested. "We haven't even opened presents yet, and it's starting to snow harder out there." "I don't care," I replied. "I won't stay somewhere my daughter isn't safe." "For God's sake, she's safe," Julia exploded. "Stop acting like I tried to murder her or something." "This is exactly why your daughter is going to grow up to be a spoiled, entitled brat just like you." The table fell silent again at Julia's outburst. I looked around at the faces of my family members, searching for any sign of support, any indication that someone understood the gravity of what had happened. Instead, I saw discomfort, embarrassment, and an overwhelming desire to sweep the incident under the rug. In their eyes, I was the problem for not letting it go, not Julia for initiating the violence. In that moment, standing in my parents' dining room with Christmas music playing ironically in the background, I felt more alone than I ever had before, despite being surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me most. Throughout the escalating confrontation, Andrew had remained unusually quiet. This wasn't because he didn't care, but rather the opposite. I knew my husband well enough to recognize the signs of his deep thinking, the slight furrow between his brows, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. He was processing, calculating, observing the family dynamics with the precision of his analytical mind. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Julia continued her verbal assault. My parents attempted to minimize the situation, and the rest of the family watched the drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination, like spectators at an accident scene. Then, with deliberate slowness, Andrew pushed back his chair. The wooden legs scraped against the floor, creating a harsh sound that cut through the chaos of voices. He rose to his full 6'2" height, his shoulders squared, his presence suddenly commanding the room without a single word spoken. One by one, the voices around the table faltered and died away. Even Julia, mid-tirade, fell silent as Andrew stood perfectly still, his gaze steadily moving from one family member to another. When the room was completely quiet, he finally spoke. "Julia," he began, his voice low and controlled in a way that demanded attention more effectively than any shout could have. "You just assaulted our daughter." The blunt statement, delivered without emotion but with absolute certainty, seemed to hang in the air. Julia opened her mouth to object, but Andrew continued before she could speak. "This isn't a debate or a discussion, it's a fact. You, an adult woman, deliberately struck a 6-month-old baby with enough force to leave a mark on her face. Because she accidentally spilled your wine." "I didn't," Julia began, but Andrew cut her off with a single raised hand. "I'm not finished." His voice remained calm, but carried an undercurrent of steel that I had never heard before. "What's even more disturbing than your action is the response of everyone at this table." He turned to my father first. "Thomas, you suggested that everyone calm down, as if Beverly's distress at seeing her child slapped was an overreaction. You called it an accident when it clearly wasn't." My father's face flushed, but he remained silent under Andrew's steady gaze. "Mary," Andrew continued, addressing my mother, "you offered whipped cream and worried about ruining Christmas, prioritizing holiday harmony over your granddaughter's safety." "Now, see here," my Uncle Roger began, puffing up indignantly. "Roger," Andrew acknowledged him with a slight nod. "You were more concerned about the use of the word abuse than the act itself. Are labels more important than what actually happened here today?" He continued around the table, addressing each person who had made excuses or remained silent, methodically dismantling their justifications with precision and clarity. No one interrupted him again. "For years, I've watched this family dynamic from the outside," Andrew said. "I've seen how Julia has been allowed to cross boundaries without consequences. I've witnessed the manipulation tactics, the victimhood, the jealousy directed at Beverly. I kept quiet out of respect, believing it wasn't my place to interfere in family matters." Julia snorted derisively. Of course she's got you completely brainwashed against me. Beverly always turns everyone against me. Andrew turned his full attention to Julia, his expression unflinching. That right there is exactly what I'm talking about. You deflect responsibility, twist situations to make yourself the victim, and gaslight others into questioning their own perceptions. It's a pattern, Julia, and everyone in this room has enabled it for far too long. He turned back to address the whole table. But today, that pattern escalated to physical violence against a helpless child. Our child. And that crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Andrew's words seemed to resonate in the sudden stillness of the room. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Julia's face, as her usual tactics failed to divert attention or sympathy her way. I need to be extremely clear, Andrew continued, his voice still measured but intense. Beverly and I are establishing a boundary today. We will not allow Lily to be in situations or around people who pose a risk to her physical or emotional well-being. That is non-negotiable. He paused, letting the statement sink in before delivering his ultimatum. Each of you has a choice to make. You can acknowledge what happened today, hold Julia accountable for her actions, and commit to creating a safe environment for Lily. Or you can continue to enable abusive behavior for the sake of keeping the peace. But understand that if you choose the latter, you are choosing not to be part of our daughter's life. That's blackmail, Julia exclaimed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. No, it's parenting, Andrew replied simply. It's our job to protect our child, even when it's difficult, even when it means making painful choices about family relationships. Julia turned to my parents, her expression incredulous. Are you going to let him talk to me like this? Are you going to let him threaten to keep your granddaughter from you? He's always hated me, she continued, her voice taking on the familiar wounded tone that had worked so effectively in the past. From the moment Beverly introduced us, he's been trying to turn her against me. He's jealous of our sister relationship. Andrew shook his head slightly. This isn't about me, Julia. This is about your actions today, and more importantly, about the reaction or lack thereof from everyone present. He turned to address my parents directly. Thomas, Mary, I know you love Lily. I've seen the joy she brings you. But love isn't just warm feelings and Christmas presents. Love is protection. Love is standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Today, you failed to protect your granddaughter when she needed you most. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father looked down at his hands, unable to meet Andrew's steady gaze. I won't bore everyone with a detailed catalog of Julia's past behavior, Andrew continued. The borrowed items that were returned damaged or not at all. The undermining comments disguised as concern. The constant competition and jealousy. Beverly has forgiven or overlooked these things for years, in hopes of having a healthy sisterhood. He looked at me then, his expression softening slightly before returning his attention to the table. But today isn't about the past. It's about right now and moving forward. It's about whether this family is capable of creating a safe, healthy environment for its newest member. Julia made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. This is ridiculous. You're making a huge deal out of nothing and threatening to tear apart this family over a little discipline. Andrew's response was quiet but powerful. No, Julia. You tore apart this family when you decided to slap an infant. The consequences of that decision are yours to bear, not ours. He turned to me, his eyes communicating a wealth of understanding and support. Then, with gentle confidence, he reached over and carefully lifted Lily from my arms. Our daughter had calmed somewhat, though her breath still hitched occasionally with residual sobs. The red mark on her cheek had begun to fade but was still visible. We're leaving now, Andrew announced, cradling Lily protectively against his chest. Each of you has decisions to make about where you stand. We'll be waiting to hear from you, but understand that empty apologies or attempts to minimize what happened today won't be sufficient. With those words, Andrew effectively ended Julia's game of manipulation and control. In the stunned silence that followed, the power dynamics of my family shifted irrevocably. For perhaps the first time, Julia found herself without the upper hand. Her usual tactics rendered ineffective by Andrew's clear-eyed assessment and unwavering resolve. As I rose to stand beside my husband and daughter, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, pain, and relief intermingling with a growing sense of liberation. Whatever came next would be difficult, but in this moment, I knew with absolute certainty that Andrew had just done something I had never been able to do. He had broken the destructive patterns that had defined my family relationships for decades. The drive home from my parents' house was silent except for Lily's occasional whimpers. The snow was falling more heavily now, large flakes illuminated by our headlights as Andrew navigated the familiar streets with careful attention. I sat in the passenger seat, emotionally exhausted. One hand reaching back to maintain contact with Lily's tiny sock-covered foot. "Are you okay?" Andrew asked softly, breaking the silence as we turned onto our street. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I feel numb, like I'm still processing what happened." Andrew nodded, understanding in his expression. "That was one of the hardest things I've ever done," he admitted. "But seeing her hit Lily, and then watching everyone just sit there, I couldn't stay silent." "Thank you," I whispered, reaching over to squeeze his hand, "for standing up for her, for standing up for both of us." Once home, we moved through our evening routine mechanically. I nursed Lily while Andrew built a fire in our living room fireplace. After putting her to bed, we sat together on the couch, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner, casting colorful shadows across the walls. "They'll try to contact us," Andrew predicted, his arm around my shoulders. "Your parents, at least. Are you ready for that?" I leaned into his warmth, considering the question. "I don't know what I'll say to them. Part of me is still in shock that they just sat there while Julia hit their granddaughter. I think they've been enabling Julia for so long that they don't even recognize it anymore," Andrew observed. "It's become their normal." "But how could hitting a baby ever be normal?" I asked, tears welling up again. How could they justify that even for a second? Andrew had no answer, and we sat in silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Despite the trauma of the day, there was a strange sense of peace in our home. As if a long, festering wound had finally been lanced, painful but necessary for healing to begin. True to Andrew's prediction, my phone began buzzing with notifications within the hour. Text messages from my mother, alternating between guilt trips, "I can't believe you left on Christmas," and attempts to minimize, "Julia feels terrible about the misunderstanding." Voicemails from my father, his tone gruff with suppressed emotion, asking us to call back so we could sort this whole thing out. Nothing from Julia directly, but according to my cousin, Melissa's text, my sister was already crafting a different narrative on social media. Vague posting about toxic family members and being attacked for speaking the truth. The digital rewriting of history had begun. I silenced my phone, unwilling to engage with any of it that night. Instead, Andrew and I created our own small Christmas celebration. We exchanged the gifts we had planned to open at my parents' house, drank hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps, and watched old holiday movies until we fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, after ensuring Lily showed no lasting physical or emotional effects from the incident, we discussed our boundaries moving forward. "I don't want to cut them off completely," I admitted, "especially my parents. They've been wrong about Julia, enabled her for years, but they do love Lily." "I agree," Andrew said, "but they need to understand that things can't go back to how they were. There have to be consequences and clear boundaries." We drafted a carefully worded email to my parents, explaining our position. We would not be in the same room as Julia until she acknowledged her behavior and sought professional help for her issues. Any attempts to pressure us into reconciliation or to minimize what had happened would result in us limiting contact. We emphasized that our priority was Lily's safety and well-being, not family harmony at all costs. 3 days after Christmas, my parents showed up at our door unannounced. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. My father looked older somehow, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. "Can we come in?" my father asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need to talk." I glanced at Andrew, who nodded slightly. We had anticipated this moment and agreed on how to handle it. "You can come in," I said. "But Lily is napping, and we won't wake her up." The conversation that followed was difficult. My parents initially tried to smooth things over, suggesting that both Julia and I had overreacted in different ways. Andrew calmly but firmly redirected them each time. "We're not here to debate what happened," he said. "We're here to discuss what happens next." Gradually, as they realized we wouldn't budge on our position, my parents began to acknowledge the reality of the situation. My mother cried as she admitted that they had always made excuses for Julia's behavior. "We thought we were helping her," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We didn't want her to feel less loved than you." "By allowing her to hurt others without consequences?" I asked. "How is that love?" My father sighed heavily. "We failed both of you," he admitted. "We should have set better boundaries with Julia long ago." It was the first genuine acknowledgement I'd ever heard from them about the dysfunctional family dynamics. And while it didn't erase the hurt, it opened a door to potential healing. We established clear rules for moving forward. My parents could see Lily, but only under our supervision. Julia would not be present during any family gatherings we attended. If they wanted a relationship with their granddaughter, they would need to respect our decisions as parents. "We understand," my mother said finally, her voice steadier than it had been. "We don't want to lose you or Lily." "Then, show us with actions, not just words," Andrew replied. "That's all we're asking." The weeks that followed brought further challenges. Julia escalated her behavior, showing up at our house one evening, demanding to be let in. I watched through the peephole as she pounded on our front door, her face contorted with anger. "You can't keep me from my family," she shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You're turning everyone against me with your lies." Andrew called the police, who arrived quickly and escorted Julia away with a warning about trespassing. The incident solidified our resolve to maintain firm boundaries. 2 weeks later, I agreed to meet Julia at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, after she sent an email claiming she wanted to apologize. Andrew was skeptical, but supported my decision, waiting in the car outside in case things went south. Julia arrived looking polished as always, but with a brittle quality to her smile that I recognized as stress. She launched immediately into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "I'm sorry if you felt I was too harsh with Lily," she began. "But you have to understand that I was just trying to help." I interrupted her, setting down my untouched coffee. "That's not an apology, Julia. That's making excuses for inexcusable behavior." Julia's facade cracked slightly, irritation flashing in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" I said I'm sorry. "I want you to acknowledge what you actually did," I replied steadily. "You slapped a 6-month-old baby across the face because she accidentally spilled your wine. Then you laughed about it and called me dramatic for being upset." "You're exaggerating what happened," Julia insisted, her voice rising. "It wasn't that hard." "It doesn't matter how hard it was," I said. "You don't hit babies, ever, for any reason." As Julia continued to justify and minimize her actions, I realized something important. My sister wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she was facing consequences. The distinction was crucial. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. "When you're ready to take responsibility for your actions and get help for your issues, we can talk again." Julia's face contorted with rage. "You've always been jealous of me. You can't stand that I'm successful while you're just a boring mom. Andrew should have been mine. He was too good for you, and you know it." The raw truth of her resentment finally laid bare. Julia seemed to deflate, realizing she had revealed too much. For the first time, I saw my sister clearly, not as the confident, successful woman she portrayed to the world, but as someone deeply unhappy, eaten up by jealousy and insecurity. "I hope you get help, Julia," I said quietly. "I really do. But until then, stay away from me and my family." As I walked away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The confrontation had been painful, but clarifying. The sister I had always hoped for, the relationship I had tried so hard to nurture, might never exist. Accepting that truth was both a loss and a release. 6 months passed, bringing summer sunshine and Lily's first birthday. We held a small celebration in our backyard, with a carefully curated guest list. My parents were there, our relationship still fragile but healing through their consistent respect of our boundaries. Some extended family members who had reached out individually to apologize and support our position after Christmas were invited. Andrew's family, who had been horrified when we told them what happened, provided the stable, loving grandparent presence that Lily deserved. Julia was notably absent, as she had been from our lives since the coffee shop confrontation. According to my mother, she had moved to Chicago for a promotion, telling everyone who would listen that she needed a fresh start away from toxic family dynamics. I recognized the phrase from her social media posts, the continued attempt to rewrite history with herself as the victim. The distance, both geographical and emotional, came as a relief. The months following the Christmas incident had been a journey of growth and healing. With Andrew's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist to address the patterns established in my childhood and to develop healthier boundaries. Dr. Marshall helped me understand that the dysfunction in my family wasn't something I had imagined or exaggerated, as I had been led to believe for years. "You were gaslit," she explained during one session. "Your perceptions and feelings were consistently invalidated, particularly regarding your sister's behavior. That's a form of emotional abuse." Understanding the dynamics intellectually was one thing. Emotionally processing them was another. There were days when grief overwhelmed me, mourning not just the relationship with my sister that I would never have, but the supportive family I had always craved. Other days brought anger at the years spent doubting my own perceptions, trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Through therapy and Andrew's unwavering support, I gradually developed a stronger sense of self, one not defined by my family's expectations or Julia's manipulations. I became more confident in my parenting decisions, trusting my instincts rather than second-guessing myself at every turn. My parents undertook their own journey of reckoning. After several stilted visits, my father surprised me by asking for the name of my therapist. "I think we could use some professional help too," he admitted. "We've made a lot of mistakes and we want to do better." They began attending family therapy sessions, slowly confronting the patterns they had established and maintained throughout my childhood. My mother called me one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I ever really saw Julia clearly," she confessed. "Or how her behavior affected you." "I'm so sorry, Beverly." The apology wasn't a magic fix for years of enabling and dismissal, but it was a start, a foundation on which we could begin to build a healthier relationship. Some family members chose a different path. My grandmother maintained that a little discipline never hurt anyone and couldn't understand why we were still making a fuss about something so trivial. Uncle Roger and Aunt Patricia sided with Julia, finding it easier to accept her version of events than to confront the uncomfortable truth. These relationships naturally faded from our lives, and while there was sadness in that, there was also peace in not fighting battles that couldn't be won. Surprisingly, my cousin Melissa became an unexpected ally. She reached out a month after Christmas with a long email detailing her own experiences with Julia's manipulative behavior over the years. "I never said anything because I thought it was just me she didn't like," she wrote. "Watching what happened at Christmas and then seeing how everyone reacted was like finally seeing the elephant in the room that we've all been pretending wasn't there." Lily thrived throughout this period of family reconfiguration, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities swirling around her. She took her first steps 2 months after her birthday, toddling across our living room with determination and glee. Her vocabulary expanded rapidly, filling our home with attempts at words that made perfect sense in her world, if not always in ours. Looking at my daughter now, seeing her grow into a secure, happy child, I know that the painful decisions we made were necessary. The boundaries we established, though difficult to enforce, created the safe space she needed to flourish. The family we surrounded her with might be smaller than the one I grew up with, but it was healthier, built on genuine love rather than obligation or appearance. Andrew remained my rock throughout this journey. The man who had stood up in my parents' dining room on Christmas Day, who had broken the cycle of enabling and denial with clear-eyed truth, continued to support me through every step of healing. "I'm proud of you," he told me often. "Changing family patterns is one of the hardest things a person can do." The journey isn't over, of course. Family healing, like any significant change, doesn't follow a neat linear path. There are setbacks, moments when old patterns threaten to reassert themselves. My mother occasionally slips into her peacekeeper role, trying to subtly pressure us to make up with Julia. My father sometimes grows frustrated with the ongoing need to examine and discuss family dynamics. "Can't we just move forward?" he'll ask. In those moments, I remind myself of the red mark on Lily's cheek, of her confused cries, of the table of adults who sat in silence. I remember the promise I made to myself and to my daughter that day, to create a family environment where she would always be safe, where her boundaries would be respected, where love didn't come with conditions or costs. The greatest lesson I've learned through all of this is that true family isn't defined by blood or shared history. True family is built on respect, on healthy boundaries, on the courage to speak difficult truths, and the wisdom to know when to walk away. Sometimes, protecting those you love means making the hardest choices, standing firm even when it would be easier to give in for the sake of peace. As Lily grows, she will eventually ask questions about her aunt, about family gatherings that seem smaller than those of her friends. When that time comes, I will tell her the truth, in age-appropriate ways, not to burden her, but to empower her with the knowledge that she deserves respect and safety in all her relationships. What happened that Christmas Day was painful, but it was also a gift, forcing us to confront the unhealthy patterns that had defined my family for generations. In breaking those patterns, we created space for something better to grow, something healthier for Lily to inherit. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences. Share it with someone who might need to hear that establishing boundaries with family is not just acceptable but sometimes necessary for healing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the families we create are stronger than the ones we're born into.